Yes, I think it's fair to say that I was, a materialist neuroscientist. I believed the brain creates consciousness. Now, that doesn't mean that I hadn't spent some significant portion of my earlier life, going to churches and wanting to believe in what I heard in the Methodist Church. But then through much of my career in neurosurgery, I just really struggled with how conscious awareness could survive the death of the brain and body. And to me, that was a real deep mystery. And that's why I was rewarded with a glimpse of that world of consciousness unbridled by the brain when I went into coma back in November of 2008, and it was a very rapid descent over about 3.5 hours from some back pain through severe headache and then grand mal seizures and then deep coma for 7 days. And the good news about all that is that my neurologic exams, CT and MRI scans, lab values, and everything revealed a very severe case of meningoencephalitis that really should have killed me and should not have allowed my escape, especially in the form of a full recovery over a few months, which is what actually happened. So to me, the whole thing is a tremendous gift. And that includes an acknowledgement that the lessons I would have learned through this whole process would have been very similar if I'd gone on to die. So luckily, I got the blessing of also being able to come back and then struggle with an understanding of it. Mainly because of the nature of the experience that happened when my brain was so demonstrably offline. And it's not only my account in the book Proof of Heaven that refers to the medical details of the case, but also three physicians who were fascinated by my recovery, who reviewed my medical records and basically had two major conclusions in their peer-reviewed medical case report that came out in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September 2008. The first was that my brain was in absolutely no shape to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination or confabulation. I had full thickness damage to my neocortex in all lobes of my brain. My brain stem was damaged even from day one. And really, going through my medical record, certainly the first pass, it was like, wait a minute. This is not the medical record of someone who ends up coming back and benefiting from a full recovery. This is of somebody who goes on to die. And in fact, the peer reviewers at the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases shared that kind of surprise, and they challenged the three doctors who wrote the case report and said, well, how do you explain this? I mean, this is unprecedented in the medical literature. They call the case absurd because nobody who has that dire a dive into meningoencephalitis ends up benefiting from a full recovery. And that's when the three physicians, Serbi Khanna, Lauren Moore, and Bruce Grayson, who wrote the case report, made it clear to the peer reviewers that they thought it's because of the NDE that I was able to muster that kind of a recovery. And that was plenty sufficient for those scientific peer reviewers. They said, okay, well, I think you have an explanation. And they went on and published the case on that basis. Of course, they don't really talk about spirituality in the case report, but they do point out the astonishing nature of this recovery. And that's something that, of course, shocked me no end. And that's what I had to come to a deeper explanation of understanding how I could be gifted with such a recovery. It seemed kind of crazy to just attribute it to blind luck because we don't see that kind of luck manifesting in the medical literature for these kind of cases. But the people who wrote the case report, and I guess the peer reviewers, knew there were other cases of near-death experiences that were associated with an extraordinary healing, like Mary C. Neal, the orthopedic surgeon who was in a kayaking accident in Chile in the late 90s. Her kayak thrust underwater under boulders, broke her legs. She was underwater more than 30 minutes in a warm water drowning, brought to the surface dead and resuscitated, but had a long recovery over a year or more, but ended up having a full recovery. And she had a profound spiritual journey. Likewise, Anita Morjani, who wrote the book Dying to Be Me and had her advanced stage 4 lymphoma basically evaporate after she had a spiritual journey. So to me as a physician, first and foremost was this deep question of how can this kind of healing be obtained? I certainly didn't seem to have any special ingredients going in that would have allowed me to muster this kind of recovery. So I was just fascinated by what it tells us about all of our abilities to come into kind of wholeness and healing in the face of such an onslaught. And to me, that's how I've spent a lot of the 14 years since that time. The a brief version of the journey I witnessed, for anyone who has not read the book Proof of Heaven or seen me talk on the internet or what have you, it involved kind of a very complex, multi-layered uh, dip into spiritual realms. And the interesting thing is the entire journey, from my perspective, was from a point of amnesia. I had no memory of Eben Alexander's life. I had no knowledge of Earth, of humans, of this universe. I mean, it really was an empty slate, which I think was also an important part of the journey. Now, of course, when I initially came back from all this, totally mystified by it, and my doctors were just telling me, well, you were very sick. We don't even know how you're coming back here, but the dying brain can play all kinds of tricks. So you can just forget about it. And so I tended to follow the advice of my doctors and think, wow, what a fascinating hallucination. And that's how I had to label it initially, because that's what my doctors told me it was. But that's before I started diving into my medical records and then trying to put together the big objective pieces of all this. And realized that I had a real conundrum on my hands to try and explain. And of course, in the book Proof of Heaven, I tell the story of how months after my coma, 4 months after my coma, I actually received a piece of information that had to do with the fact that I was adopted. And that's a big part of my whole long, story as a human being. Was put up for adoption at age 11 days by my birth mother, although she couldn't really let me go. And that was kind of a catch-22, a paradox, because I was stuck in the baby dorm in the children's home, social workers having taken me from my 16-year-old unwed mother, but she was still unwilling to sign the papers to give me up. So I was stuck there for about 4 months awaiting adoption. And that was not a good thing for me. And in fact, for much of my life, there was this deep kind of subconscious knowing that maybe I didn't even deserve to exist because my birth mother had given me up. That's not something that really achieved conscious level of awareness, but it was an underlying piece of my journey that came to the fore after my coma and after I, was introduced to that spiritual realm in such a profound fashion, trying to make sense of it all, because I had answers in that NDE, answers of love and connection with the universe that completely resolved the issues of my adoption, et cetera. And for that, I'm very grateful. And to me, especially another part of the gift here is coming to realize, as I did when I was driving up the road from my old home in Lynchburg, Virginia to Charlottesville, 2 years to the hour after I awoke from coma, to give a talk to Bruce Grayson and the Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA. I'd been introduced to them. I'd read some books indicating, showing me of their existence. And I'd reached out by email to Bruce Grayson. He had invited me to come give a talk. And I still didn't know how my story would be received by the scientific community. I knew that my doctors back in where all this had occurred were fascinated by it. In fact, I was able to attend my own morbidity mortality conference a few weeks after awakening from coma. That's a very rare treat for a patient. Those are usually reserved for people who have been rendered either moribund or dead by their adventure. And to be able to participate, they invited me because they wanted to know what I thought about how this recovery had happened. And then also the County Medical Society invited me to give a talk to more than 120 physicians and their spouses about this whole adventure. How did it happen? My doctors were absolutely amazed by this. But that was not something the rest of the world was necessarily privy to. And of course, I tell a lot of that follow-up story in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, for anyone who's interested in kind of the sequel to Proof of Heaven. But to me, the real gift was when I drove up to Charlottesville that day. Ed Kelly gave me a copy of their book, Irreducible Mind. And oh my gosh, over the next 2 weeks, I read through that hefty tome, and I realized that scientists were hot on the trail to trying to unravel and understand these kind of spiritual experiences, and we're actually making tremendous headway. And I've worked in a kind of a loose collaborative fashion with Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA, but also, of course, with Institute of Noetic Sciences with Dean Radin and others, and have really loved getting to know this whole group. Beyond the Brain. Coming over there in 2018 was a beautiful eye opener for Karen and myself. We just absolutely loved the power and the progress and the passion of this kind of group of scientists to come to a deeper understanding of these profound mysteries that I would say humanity has been engaged in trying to understand this for at least the last 10,000 years or so, and we're finally actually making some real progress, and that's what I think is the gift to the world. I am elated to be part of all this, and certainly appreciate uh, being invited to work with Medical and Scientific Network, Galileo Commission. I mean, to me, these are the scientists who lead the way towards a much deeper understanding of the nature of reality. Materialism actually died almost a century ago. And yet, to any who haven't kind of wrestled and struggled with trying to understand what quantum physics is truly telling us, they might not realize that that little comfortable position of materialist thought is actually completely disproven and outmoded. And it's, to me, amazing how the scientific journalist community, scientific media, has really not been able to kind of get at the power of this revolution as much as many of the involved scientists have. And that's why I'm so happy to see journalists, media, people who are interested in influencing the mainstream getting on board for this fantastic revelation, if for no other reason than the fact that materialist thought is about to kill this planet. The false sense of separation inherent in materialism is just right at the head of the pack and leading us off the abyss right now with the corporate greed, addiction to fossil fuels, toxic pollution, um, uh, just the many different ways that our modern society has encapsulated this false version of reality. Survival of the fittest is kind of the misnomer delivered from the 20th century, when in fact most biologists would agree that collaboration, cooperation is what actually leads to biological success on this planet. And that is something that should be reflected in our social systems and in all of our activities as, Homo sapiens, if sapiens truly means wise. And yet, to me, when I look at our species now today, I see a bunch of cavemen running us straight into the dirt. And it is high time that we woke up to a deeper, richer, connected reality that's implied by a quantum informed version of conscious awareness and interpretation of the mind body relationship. And that's what I believe is the importance of groups like this to accomplish for the world at large.